All right, hello everyone, welcome. My name is Mei Vang and I'm with the Minnesota DNR Fish and Wildlife Outreach Team. Welcome to the 217th episode of the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. Believe it or not, the summer fishing season here in Minnesota is almost already halfway through, but don't worry, there's still plenty of time to get out on the water. So wherever you are spending time out fishing this summer, some of you may have your favorite lures or your favorite bait. Here in Minnesota, anglers have had a culture, or we have a culture of using live bait. And in fact, a recent survey reported that more than 70% of Minnesota anglers actually report using live minnows. So in today's episode, we have Sean Sisler, who is the Minnesota DNR's, and I'm just going to read this so that I don't get your title wrong, Sean.
Fair enough.
It's quite a long one, but so this is Minnesota DNR's Commercial Aquatic Programs and Fish Health Consultant. He's joining us today to share more about where minnows come from in Minnesota and some regulations related to harvesting and using live bait in Minnesota. So again, welcome, Sean. Thank you so much for being here. I know you have a lot of great information to share with us today, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. If you would you start us off with sharing a little bit more about your role at the DNR and the work that you do?
Yep, I'd be happy to. And thank you for that introduction. Yep, so my name is Sean Sisler. I'm the Commercial Aquatic Programs and Fish Health Consultant with the Minnesota DNR. And I work a lot with commercial aquatic programs. And I'll get a little bit into who I am. I've worked in natural resources for over 20 years. I started off with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, but I've been working for Minnesota, I think a little over 18 now. So most of it's been with the Minnesota DNR. I work with aquaculture licensees, commercial fishing, minnow dealers, and retailers. And then there's a handful of other types of licenses um, that I also deal with, like frog licenses and stuff like that. And then fish health as it relates to these commercial aquatic businesses. So we're going to talk about bait today. And most of the information that I'm going to be talking about is you can find in the 2025 fishing regulations on page 38 and 39. So that's kind of a reference that you can use and go back to. And I think Cassie was going to put a link in the presentation or in the chat for how to get to those fishing regs online. So there are different types of baits. There's live bait, there's dead bait, which could be fresh, frozen, preserved, or imported. And then there's artificials. So I'm going to be mostly focusing on live and dead baits and not really talking about artificial bait too much. Just know that artificial baits like your lures, plastic worms, and that type of stuff. Um, so I'm going to kind of define what bait is. And um, in Minnesota, you can use a wide variety of different types of bait to catch fish. And they can include like uh, fish parts, worms, amphibians, different types of invertebrates and the insects used for taking wild animals in waters of the state. And then it could also include like things you get from the grocery store, like chicken livers. People like using chicken livers um, to catch catfish. So, um, but one of the big categories of bait that we have in the state is minnows. And so I thought it would be important at this time to just give you what the legal definition of minnows is. Um, so minnows are members of the minnow family, first of all, which is Cyprinidae, and except for carp and goldfish. And carp and goldfish are an invasive species, and so we do not include them in the definition of minnows. It can also include members of the mud minnow family or Umbridae. members of the sucker family that are not over 12 inches long, and that's Catastomidae. And then bullheads, ciscos, whitefish, golden eye, and moon eyes that are not over 7 inches long. And the reason we have those size limits is because when you start getting larger than 12 inches for suckers or larger than 7 inches for bullheads, you're starting to get into those sizes of suckers and bullheads that people target for eating or for commercial fishing. So um, tadpole mad toms and willow cats and stone cats can also be used as, are also defined as minnows. And then kind of an oddball here is leeches. So leeches in Minnesota, we define those as minnows. And the reason we do that is because, um, when you're harvested in similar places, the same people kind of harvest those as harvest minnows, and we have similar concerns when it comes to moving water and invasive species, just because of where you're harvesting these. So they get rolled into the definition of minnow to make the regulations a little easier. Um, so other types of bait you can use is you can use native rough fish as cut bait. Um, you can use frogs that are up to 6 inches. If you have an angling license, people can catch frogs with an angling license that are up to 6 inches and use them as bait. And that's basically from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail. Um, you can use sorry, if they're bigger than 6 inches, that's typically the size people would be going for if they're harvesting frogs for frog legs. And so there's a separate commercial frog license um, that you can get to harvest frogs for food. They're crayfish you can use as live bait, but only on the water body on which you caught it while you're on that water body. Anywhere else that you use crayfish, they have to be processed or dead. And I might use that term. The legal term for processed is to make dead. So that's I might interchange those throughout this presentation. And then probably one of the biggest thing people use is worms to go fishing. Um, in under our regulations, worms and invertebrates are largely unregulated as far as where you take them. There are some exceptions, and when it comes to worms, one of the big exceptions is jumping worms. Jumping worms are prohibited invasive species. They do use those in other parts of the nation, but not in Minnesota, as far as I know. And so you can't possess or use prohibited invasive species. Um, this is a picture of my kid, and she kind of dressed up in some of my gear, and I just thought she looked pretty tough. So I thought this was a good one to talk about bait that you can't use as bait. There's certain things you can't use as bait, and so one of those would be using game fish or game fish parts. There is an exception to this where on Lake Superior you can use fish eggs, like salmon eggs, for catching fish on Lake Superior. But that's one of the only exceptions for using game fish or game fish parts. Again, carp and goldfish are invasive species, and if they get in Minnesota waters, or when they get in Minnesota waters, they can cause lots of problems. There are a lot of metro lakes that get goldfish in them, and they can be problematic. And so, to discourage moving those fish around, you can't use them as bait. Live minnows imported from outside the state can't be used as bait, but you can import dead minnows, but they have to have been either processed in, or they have to be preserved in a way that would kill VHS, which is a type of virus that's in the Great Lakes area. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that later when I talk about VHS free zones, or has been comes from a source that's been tested as not having VHS. So they need one of those two things. And if you go on our website and search dead bait, we have a page that has examples of using dead bait in Minnesota and their what those labels look like, because you need to have those labels on your person when you're using dead bait. And I think Cassie can put that link in the chat. Animals with a protected status you can't use as bait, so that would be your threatened and endangered species. Prohibited invasive species, I mentioned earlier, you can't possess those and therefore you can't use them as bait. And then finally, salamanders. You can't use salamanders, including mud puppies. Salamanders were added to the protected wild animals list in, I think, right around 2018. And if you are, you can't harvest something from the protected animals list, wild animals list, unless there's a law authorizing that. And then mud puppies are a species of special concern. So what about transporting minnows? So in Minnesota, there is a law that says that you cannot, for most fish, you cannot transport them in enough water to keep them alive. But there are a couple exceptions. There's suckers and bullheads that are sizes that are greater than the definition in minnows. And then minnows is one of the other things that you can transport in water alive. I'll talk about suckers and bullheads in a second. So for minnows, you can transport up to 12 dozen or 144 minnows. If you're transporting more than that, then you're kind of getting into a commercial level of transporting minnows, and you need to have a commercial vehicle license. And the picture here is of a minnow dealer, a minnow registered minnow dealer vehicle for Ken's Bait. And Ken's Bait is one of the big distributors that distribute to most of the metro bait shops. Minnows have to be transported in either tap or bottled water. You cannot transport them in surface water. And then when you're using minnows and you're leaving the lake, you need to exchange the water that those minnows are being held in with clean water that you brought. So if your minnows are in your live well, you need to drain your live well, pull your drain plug, and put those minnows from your live well and put them into a clean water container that you brought, not lake water. And then also, we do not want you dumping your bait in either in the lake or on the ground. We want you to throw those away. We have this container crawlers thing, which comes from people who were dumping night crawlers in the forest, and those crawlers really eat up the duff layer, which is important to salamander habitat. And so when you're done with your unwanted bait, should just be disposed in the trash. So I talked about the two species. So when you're transporting suckers, anything that's 12 inches or less, those are defined as minnows, and you can use the same standards that I just talked about as far in the previous slide for transporting minnows. Minnows that are greater than 12 inches, if you have you can transport dead suckers and use those as cut bait. That's not an issue as long as they weren't harvested from an infested water. And then if you're transporting suckers alive that are greater than 12 inches, they need to be purchased from a commercial vendor. So that would be like from a minnow retailer or a dealer or something like that. They need to be in a container, not in your boat or your live well. Again, you're supposed to drain your live well and pull the plug out of your boat before you transport. So they need to be in a container, and then retain your sales receipt and have that on your person to show that these larger suckers were indeed purchased. I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of talk about the different types of fish that you can purchase at a minnow retail. Um, so if you look at that very top one, that's one of those big suckers that are, greater than 12 inches. And people use those for catching muskies and big northern pike. The next two down is also suckers, and they are basically what they would call a heavy pike and light pike size. The one in the middle there, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but the one in the middle is a golden shiner and represents, shiners in general. And then those bottom two are both fathead minnows. But if you go to a retail store and purchase minnows, it's either gonna say fatheads or crappie minnows. And just know that those aren't necessarily referring to a species. What those are referring to is a grading size. And so when you buy fatheads, they're probably mostly fatheads because that's the main minnow that we have in the state. But they could be other things. It could be any of those things that are listed in the definition of minnow. Could be some really small suckers in there. Could be mud minnows. And then the same thing for when you get the crappie minnows. Those are going to be mostly fathead minnows, but you could have other things in there too. And just know that that's what that is. It's just two different sizes of the same suite of minnows. Um, and then there are some other random type of not random, but different types of minnows you might encounter. Um, Red tails are horny head chubs, and people like using those in the summer. And then rain, um, rainbows are referring to dace, specifically red-sided dace. So transporting bullheads, if you look at this map of Minnesota, um, the you can't transport live bullheads north of Highway 210. So this is a map of Highway 210, and it's just kind of a line that goes across the state that people can like see and find that just denotes like northern Minnesota from the rest of Minnesota. And the reason you can't do that, we don't have a lot of bullheads in northern Minnesota, certainly not the level that we have in southern Minnesota. And so we don't want to be moving bullheads too much in northern parts of Minnesota. We use that Highway 210 demarcation also for things like walleye strains and indigenous species type stuff. And so that's why we use that here, is just kind of a signifying northern Minnesota from southern Minnesota to help protect those northern lakes from bullheads. Um, Again, bullheads that are less than 7 inches are defined as minnows, and you can use the standards for transporting minnows there. Bullheads must be transported in a sealed container. And then some people like using larger bullheads to catch, well, I've heard of them using them for muskies, but really to catch flathead catfish. They like to use these larger bullheads. And so bullheads from 7 to 10 inches, you can catch those as part of your daily possession limit and use those as bait and transport them in water. So that's one of the other exceptions for transporting fish in water. So what are the sources for getting minnows? As I've been kind of talking, people with an angling license can harvest minnows for personal use. Um, they can also purchase minnows from a minnow dealer or retailer. And an angling license costs about $25. And again, it allows you to transport up to 12 dozen minnows at a time. And in Minnesota, we sell about 1 million angling license. Most people purchase their minnows from a minnow retailer. So this would be places like Joe's Sporting Goods or Kathy's Bait or Blue Ribbon Bait. Those are all places that have minnow retail licenses. There's several gas stations that have minnow retail licenses. And what minnow retailers do is they're able to purchase minnows from a minnow dealer, that's someone who's harvesting minnows, and sell them to the general public at retail. A retail license is $47 per location. And then they're also allowed to import dead bait that is labeled, as we mentioned before, uh, either coming from a VHS tested source or preserved in a manner that kills VHS. And then we sell around about 1,000 minnow retail licenses a year. A minnow dealer license, these are the people who are going out and harvesting minnows from the wild. There's several levels of minnow dealers. There can be those people who are just going out and harvesting for um, to sell. There are some that are large enough that they can sell to a couple different retailers. And then there are these distributors that purchase from many minnow dealers and then will distribute to the minnow retail, all the minnow retail shops. And that Ken's bait that I mentioned earlier is an example of that, where they buy a lot of their bait and then sell it to the retailers as a distributor. Each uh, The minnow dealer license also allows them to purchase and sell at wholesale, and then it also includes one retail location. So basically, take the retail license and then add the number of dealer licenses, and then you have all the retail locations. A minnow dealer license is $310 plus $15 per vehicle. Um, and then we sell around 250 of those licenses annually. The final category we have is aquaculture. So these are people who are harvesting and raising minnows. Um, the aquaculture license with a minnow dealer endorsement is about $535 plus $15 per each additional vehicle. We sell about 150 to 200 of these licenses annually, and about 50 of those have that minnow dealer endorsement. And so these are the people who are raising minnows. So minnows are economically and culturally important to Minnesota. Um, According to the USDA aquaculture census from 2023, nationwide, um, the minnow industry raises about 400 or $48 million worth of minnows. Now, these are just the ones that are licensed as aquaculture. This does not include the wild harvest, so that would be even a larger number if you include wild harvest. In Minnesota, um, we are ranked number 4 in the nation for producing minnows. And again, this is just wild harvest, or sorry, this is just the aquaculture, not the wild harvest side of it. We are fourth behind Arkansas, which is hands down the largest producer in the entire country. Over half the minnows are produced out of Arkansas. Wisconsin and Ohio round out the list ahead of us. And then it really drops off once you get to South Dakota. So South Dakota sells about $1 million worth, and everybody else is less than a million, um, like quite a bit less than a million. Um, Minnows support our $1.8 billion angling industry, which has a further economic output of 4.2 billion. So that 1.8, that's direct costs, and then the 4.2 are like additional things that are related to angling. So that includes things like when you're going to a resort, paying for the hotel, paying for meals as part of your fishing trip. So it's really a big part of our culture. In Minnesota, 70% over 70% of Minnesota anglers use minnows, and this was a study that was done by um, McEachran, who is out of the U. I don't know if they published it yet, so I don't have the actual date. But that was a survey that was done as part of what people do with their minnows, whether um, you know, and over 70% of Minnesota anglers use minnows. And this all starts with spot tail shiners in the spring for the angling opener. And spot tail shiners can sell for over $1 a piece in Minnesota. Minnesota anglers really like spot tail shiners for catching walleyes during the opener. And it's been said that they will bypass uh, retail shops that don't have it. And so it's really important that we address these type of things. So some of the general regulations regarding minnows, you can harvest minnows from any water body you have legal access to, with a few exceptions. The big one is infested waters, but then also trout waters, WMAs, state parks, and stuff. Minnow dealers, who are the people who are harvesting minnows, are required to take like annual online aquatic invasive species training, just so that they're aware of like where the potential risks are moving invasive species, because minnow dealers don't want to be moving invasive species, because if they are, then they need to get a permit, and once it becomes infested, and then that can impact their ability to harvest. They have designated helpers. Again, they can import dead bait, but not live bait. And then there's regulations around VHS susceptible species. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. I'll go into a bit of a deep dive on VHS. So infested waters regulations for harvesting minnows. You can't harvest minnows from infested waters for personal use, with a couple of exceptions. One of those exceptions is if it only has Eurasian water milfoil, then you're allowed to use cylindrical traps to catch minnows, but you can't. If it has something else in there, then it's closed. Like you can't do it. There's also some regulations on rivers that are infested, where you can use hook and line to catch certain species as cut bait. Um, for commercial harvest, it requires a permit, and then that permit has you need a separate permit and separate dedicated gear for each combination of invasive species. So uh, if it's gear that if it's a water body that has faucet snails, you need separate gear and separate permit than if it has zebra mussels or zebra mussels and faucet snails. Those would all be three separate sets of gear that you need to dedicate for that type of stuff. Again, you need to haul minnows in clean water. Can't release minnows into water bodies. There's a general permit for commercial um, for cleaning and hauling uh, equipment to cleaning locations. And then you can't hold or sell minnows in infested waters. Again, they have to be clean waters. So, those minnows that you're buying from a minnow retailer, that's going to be, that needs to be in clean water. It can't be water that contains invasive species. Um, so, the last several years, there was a talk about mineral shortage, especially in 2021 and 2022. And here I have like just kind of a map of like from 2009 to 2022 about um, minnow harvest. So if you look, you have your fathead minnows here. That's like in the 200,000 gallon range. Uh, these are our top three that we produce. So fathead minnows is this middle one that's kind of flat. This one's leeches, which is another one that we really produce. And then white suckers. Those are the top three that we produce in the state. We had meetings with stakeholders in 2022 and 2023 to discuss their experiences. We met with aquaculture producers, min fish, minnow dealers, retailers, fishing guides, and DNR staff. We discussed like what type of species are they seeing shortages, what are the timings of shortages, and then we had discussions about their observations and thoughts of what it might have been doing. And then we developed recommendations and published a legislative report in 2024. And Cassie could put that link in the chat now if you want for that legislative report. And so I'll go into a little more detail on that. So some of the things that we got in that legislative report was, a lot of the minnow harvest in Minnesota is wild harvest or from aquaculture ponds that simulate natural systems. There's not a ton of pond hatcheries and pond aquaculture for minnows in Minnesota at this time. And then the last several years at that time would have been like 2021, 2022. It had been hard to come by minnows. A lot of this has been attributed to the general loss of water, development of lakes that used to be owned by one person, but then all of a sudden, like there's a subdivision, and a lot of times, that pond that used to have minnows in there that a minnow dealer would go to, all of a sudden, other fish start showing up in there and eat the minnows. There are concerns about agriculture practices, weather, winter kill. COVID had a lot more people going out and fishing. So there was a higher pressure. Invasive species was one of the things that was noted, and then just overall overhead related to gas and transportation costs. We kind of broke it down into three major types. There's a shiner shortage, which is kind of seasonal. We'll get into that. There was really acute fathead minnow shortage in 2021 and 2022, and then just an overall decline in leech harvest. So with shiners, there's, these are our shiners. We've got emerald shiners, which are, really change year to year. Could be high, can be low. And then you have a lot of these other shiners that we have listed here: golden shiners, common shiners, and spot-tail shiners. And these kind of show up in the news, and there's concerns about when it's a late spring or even an early spring can impact the timing of when these things are running. So through our discussions, we noted that most of the shiners is almost all wild harvest, especially spot-tail shiners. No one's raising spot-tail shiners. So anytime you have wild harvest, that's really can be impacted by the natural populations and by the weather conditions. And what we're seeing is you can see like seasonal shortages that could be related to either late ice off or early ice off and the timing of spawning runs. So if you have late ice off, it may cause that spawning run to happen later than the fishing opener. And as we mentioned, people really want spot-tail shiners for the fishing opener. And once you get into like late June, people aren't really looking to use spot-tail shiners at that point. Once you get into late June, it's the spot-tail shiners don't last as long, and they start to die, and people start switching over to other types of bait at that time. So you're really looking for those spot-tail shiners from fishing opener to about mid-June. So if there's an early ice off and the spawning run comes early, then minnow dealers can harvest those spot tails, but then they got to hold on to them for sometimes several weeks before they can sell them for the fishing opener. And then, as I mentioned before, if it's a late ice off, then that timing of that spawning run and the timing of the fishing opener are off. And minnow dealers have a hard time catching minnows through the ice, and so a lot of that is related to timing. There's also related to VHS testing. So I'll talk a little bit about VHS right here. Um, VHS is a fish disease that impacts a lot of different fish. It kind of came out in 2005 in the Great Lakes, and they really impact uh, muskie is one of the things that kills off right away. They're very sensitive to VHS, but it also impacts other species like walleye and bass and other game fish. So we used to require VHS testing for every water body that you're harvesting a VHS susceptible species, which includes spot-tail shiners. And so that limited the number of water bodies that were available for harvesting and really kind of concentrated on these larger water bodies that were being tested for VHS, like Red Lake and like Red Lake. The other thing that has been happening is that invasive species have been impacting more and more of these lakes that people were targeting. Spot tails have become infested, and that's what this graph shows. Is that this red bar shows that as time goes on, more of the lakes more of the harvest where spot tails has happened as now infested. So the other one was basically the fathead minnow shortage of 2021 and 2022. About 50% is wild harvest and 50% comes from aquaculture licensed waters. There can be seasonal shortages due to winter kill, but those typically rebound by midsummer. That being said, in the summer of 2021 and 2022, we did not see that rebound. And we think that was most likely related to drought. And if you look at the amount of fish that we're talking about for fatheads, it's like between 150,000 and 200,000 gallons a year. When you pop up here to our spot tail shiners, you're talking like 10,000 gallons. So that's like that's a factor of 10 of difference, or actually 20. So when you're closer to that 150 range, then people are kind of not seeing them as much in the bait stores, and when you're close to that 200,000 gallon range, no one's really worried about it. We also export a fair amount of fathead minnows from the state. We're a net exporter of fathead minnows, and even in years when we were having close to that 150,000 range, we're still exporting about 50,000 gallons. Fatheads rebounded in 2023, and there wasn't a winter kill in 2024, and the populations have been harvest has been remained stable. There's been an overall leech harvest decline. Most of leech is wild harvest, and it's been in decline since 2010. Leeches we measure in pounds, and so typically harvest between 100,000 and 200,000 pounds. And we still export. We're still a net exporter of leeches, but they're we're harvesting less, and so this is something we need more information on to understand what's going on here. So what are the steps that the DNR is taking to increase minnow production? I'm looking at my time, and I probably need to get through these slides in about 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to do that. So we have the VHS-free zones, a golden shiner project, which is looking at raising shiners versus just relying on wild harvest. A couple of projects looking at harvesting minnows in infested waters, and then a commercial minnow work group. So the VHS-free zones In 2021, we implemented, or in 2022, we implemented the VHS-free zones. Um, and what has happened, we've had since 2025, we've been testing waters for VHS. And we were able to consult with the USDA APHIS and the Great Lakes Fisheries Health Committee about developing these VHS-free zones, and we were able to leverage the almost 20 years of testing now, where we haven't had an outbreak of VHS in our inland waters or even a detection ever. VHS is viral hemorrhagic septicemia. Like I mentioned before, it's a really bad disease that impacts muskies and other game fish. And all the other Great Lakes, especially in Erie, Huron, Michigan, they're seeing outbreaks of VHS every, 1 to 3 years. And we are the only state, a Great Lakes state, that hasn't had a VHS outbreak. And I'm knocking on wood because I don't want this to happen in our inland waters. And we're trying to keep it that way. And we've updated our fish kill reporting system so that fish kills are being reported to the state duty officer. And if there's a one that could be VHS, then we're prioritizing testing those. We also we test a subset of water bodies every year within each one of these major watersheds here to maintain that VHS-free status. And then we have biosecurity in the form of our state regulations, no movement of water, no dumping of unused bait, and no importation of live bait, and requiring that testing or preservation if they're coming in as dead bait. So having these zones has really helped out minnow dealers by opening up more waters to be able to harvest these VHS susceptible species like emerald shiners and spot-tail shiners. We've also been working on the Golden Shiner project. We've partnered with Sea Grant and the industry to look at different scenarios for raising golden shiners. It's a funded project through the LCCMR in 2021. And the idea is in Minnesota, it typically takes about 2 growing seasons for a golden shiner to reach market size, which is somewhere between 2.5 inches and 4 inches. And what this project is doing is looking at hatching golden shiners in the wintertime and then growing them out during the spring and the summer. So giving the golden shiners a jump on their natural spawning, because typically they spawn about midsummer. So this gives them a jump on that. And we've been growing them out in different scenarios, and the results have been promising, where we're seeing that 3 to 4 inch, in between 3 to 4 inches. This one's a 4 inch, and it those aren't all of them, but we're seeing that with a combination of early stocking and feeding. The other thing that's been really interesting is trying to combine golden shiners with an aquaponic system. So an aquaponic system is where someone is raising both plants, so like lettuces or tomatoes, and fish. And a lot of times people will use tilapia as in their aquaponic system, and they make money on the plant side, but they don't make money on the fish side because you know tilapia retails somewhere between $5 and $7 a pound. That means if you're selling it wholesale, you're looking at somewhere between $3 to $4 a pound. And with golden, if you switch those out with golden shiners sell for over $1 a piece. There's no overhead associated with like trying to process the fish, and all you need to do is just call up a minnow retailer or minnow dealer, and they'll just take minnows for it from you and get be able to sell them. So that's been a really interesting a business model that we've been trying to encourage. So the other thing we did was this pilot project looking at harvesting minnows in zebra mussel infested waters. We focused on waters that had spot tail or emerald shiner runs. It actually ended up being just mostly spot tail runs. And then we're going to use this information to evaluate potential permit conditions. And through this pilot project, they're using traps, which is something normally you can't use in zebra mussel infested waters, but we're doing temperature and velager monitoring. And through that pilot project, we got almost 2,000 gallons of um, of spot tail shiners just for in 2024. So it really helped make those more available um, during the season. And then we developed a new species work group with commercial minnows. So we have species work groups for walleyes, for sausage, northern pike, and muskie, panfish. And so we created a commercial minnow work group where we have regular meetings with the industry and people who have a commercial interest in minnows, like guides and retail shops, minnow dealers, aquaculture, and it's a forum to where we can address concerns and have issues in a faster and uh, um, uh, more formal process to address those. And one of the things that we're going to be working on is updating rules to allow uh, new gear types and update our gear stuff because that hasn't been done in a number of years. If you want more information on the legislative report on ensuring a viable Minnesota grown bait supply, that is available on our website. All you have to do is search legislative reports, and it's one of the ones from 2024. So you can read more information on the steps what we outlined and the steps we've been taking. Um, that's what I got for today, for the bait stuff. So this is my contact information. If you have questions, feel free to give me a call or you can email me, and I'd be happy to take any questions you guys might have.
All right, thank you so much, Sean, for sharing that information. That was a lot of great information. I definitely learned a lot, but I hope everyone else did too. We do have a question from Bob, and the question is it lawful to use salmon eggs as bait?
So you can use salmon eggs as bait on Lake Superior. So that's the one place where it's allowed, and that you can find that in the fishing regs.
Great. And then just a reminder for everyone that is in our audience today, if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the Q&A. You can find that at the bottom of the screen. There's three little ellipses that'll say Q&A. You can pop that open and then enter your question in. Um, I also do have another question for you. And I wanted you to just explain, you defined bait, but I wanted you to explain for those that may not know exactly what cut bait means. Can you explain what that means for those that may not know
Sure.
what that means?
Yeah, so cut bait would be where you have a large native rough fish, usually white sucker or maybe freshwater drum, and you chunk it up and put it on a hook. And that's basically all it is. And so a lot of people do that for sturgeon fishing. They'll have a circle hook, sturgeon and channel catfish is they'll have a large circle hook, maybe a 3/0, and then they'll put a chunk of what we call a chunk of meat on there, and toss it out, and that's a really good way to catch sturgeon and channel catfish. Um, Now, flathead catfish, they like to see things that are more alive, and so that's where those big bullheads come in. Is you can put hook through those big bullheads, and then they like to eat those because they want something that's moving.
Great, thanks. Alexis has a comment, and Alexis says, I'm grateful that Minnesota has the expertise of Sean and others at DNR to stay focused on these topics for the health of our fisheries and keep up the great work. So thank you, Sean, for the work that you do. And then Mary asks, are fathead minnows a specific type of minnow? And when we've purchased them in the past, we sometimes get a variety of different looking fatheads.
Yeah, so that was that one graph that I had. So when a fathead minnow is a type of minnow, it's a specific species, and it's the number one minnow that we normally catch in Minnesota for bait. However, when you're buying them from the retail store, fathead minnow is actually referring to a grading size. So they're a slightly larger minnow um, that you're going to have, and it's going to be mostly fathead minnows, but it could contain other things. So any of those other minnows that were on the list could be in there. There could be some mud minnows in there. There could be there could be a small bullhead in there. Um, and those are all defined as minnows, and you may see those in with your minnow mix. But when you buy fathead minnows, it's not just fatheads. It's a grading size, so it's a size of minnow um, that you're going to have. The same thing with the crappie minnows. Those aren't crappies, but they're smaller minnows. They're a smaller grading size that you would use put on a hook to catch crappies or I'm from Michigan, so we call them perch minnows. It's the same idea. It's those smaller minnows, and they're going to be mostly fathead minnows, but there could be other things mixed in there.
Okay. And along with those same lines, so we know that we talk about there's harvesting, things like that in like the ocean, and there's things like such as bycatch. Is that a concern for when people are harvesting for minnows?
The bycatch,
Yeah.
yeah. So when people are harvesting minnows, they can only take the minnows. So if they do get like a small bluegill or something like that, they just need to release those and just keep the minnows. So.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about the process of if you are going to be moving dead minnow from lake to lake, like what is that preservation process like?
So if you're going to be moving dead minnows in Minnesota, if you're just a regular angler, um, then most of the state is covered by that VHS free zones. And so if you go to that dead bait page, you can create your own label saying where you caught it, um, when, sorry, when you caught it. You put your angling license in there, and then um, you would put down the VHS certification date for whenever you caught it, and then you could freeze it. You don't necessarily need to preserve it because they came from a VHS free zone. Now, if you're importing it from out of state, or if you're doing if you're getting um, melt from Lake Superior, um, those that is that's a VHS risk zone. So then it would need to be preserved under a bait preservation permit. And so we have bait preservation permits available online. You need to have some sort of qualifying commercial license to get that permit. And then we have different methods that are listed on the permit that are approved for ensuring that they don't have VHS. Um, so I know we have some minnow dealers who will purchase fish from a, a grocery store and then preserve them and sell them. Um, so our VHS susceptible species are species that are susceptible to the strain of VHS that we find in the Great Lakes, which is the 4B strain. Well, what the other strains of VHS are found in the ocean. And so you can't just go to a grocery store and grab like mackerel and use that as bait, because that would be bait that came from outside the state and potentially could have been exposed to one of those strains of VHS. The thought is that the strain of VHS that we have came from the ocean, and then mutated to affect the freshwater species that we have here. So, but we do have some minnow dealers who take those, preserve them in a manner that kills VHS, and then can sell them. And then they'll have that label, and you need to have
Okay.
that label on your person.
Okay. Great. Thank you for answering that. I believe those were the questions that were in the Q&A. So thank you again, Sean, for sharing that information on live bait. And thank you again for the work that you do. And we hope that this information helps clarify or answer any questions that you have about using live bait. And hopefully it also encourages you to get out there more as well. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. As a reminder that this episode was recorded, and so you can go back and refer to any of that information that Sean shared with us, or you can also rewatch it if you'd like to. And if you need more information, you can also go to our website, which I believe Cassie left a link on our webpage for the fishing regulations. So on page 38 and 39 of the regulation books, you can find that a lot of that same information as well. Make sure that you register for next week's episode, so episode 200 and 218. So next week, Sasha Lodge from DNR's, she's our DNR's terrestrial invasive species coordinator, and she's going to be speaking to us about the two different buckthorn species here in Minnesota, how that impacts the forests here, and how you can manage this invasive species. So we hope you are able to get out on the water for some fishing with live bait, and we hope to see you next week. So thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.